The Jets are off to a surprising start this season. Is it time to raise our expectations for what 2022 can be? Is it too early to even talk about playoffs? Let's discuss today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, October 18th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free, and it's available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening. You'll never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Bird Dogs, the most comfortable shorts, pants, and sweatpants with built-in liners. Go to birddogs.com, use promo code LOCKEDON, and boom, a free Bird Dogs rope hat with your pair of Bird Dogs. The Jets are off to a 4-2 start. This is something very few people were expecting. Even the most optimistic Jets fan has to be happy today. The only team with a better record in the AFC than the Jets right now are the Buffalo Bills, a team that happens to share the AFC East with the Jets. And after such a successful first 6 games, I think the question has to be asked, should we raise our expectations for this season? I think most of us thought the Jets were maybe a 6, 7, 8 win team going into the year. The focus was on respectability. The focus was on playing credible football. It was about being competitive, and it was about the development of young players. Well, now at 4-2, in a conference where, there are a couple of teams that look great, like Buffalo, but there really are not many great teams, and 7 of these teams have to make the playoffs this year. Is it time to raise our expectations? 6 weeks in, is it too early to start talking about playoffs? Well, that's what we'll discuss on today's show. Now, the Jets are an interesting team from the standpoint that part of success this year was obviously going to be about the record. But part of it was slightly independent. I frame it that way because I think when you're talking about developing a young quarterback, it's very tempting to say, well, our record doesn't matter. All that matters is how our young quarterback develops. But your young quarterback's development has something to do with how your record ends up. It's not completely a one-to-one situation. The last couple of years, Justin Herbert could not have played better for the Chargers, and the Chargers haven't made the playoffs yet with him. So, it's not always one-to-one because there's more parts of your team than the quarterback. At the same time, if you have a quarterback who's developing, who looks good, you're probably not going to go 2-15. You're probably not going to go 3-14. The quarterback does have something to do with your record. So it's not all about, it's not all that the two are completely separate, but one has something to do with the other. That said, I think there are lots of Jets fans who entering the season would have told you that Zach Wilson's development is something they focus on more than the record, because if Zach Wilson develops, to a large extent, the record will take care of itself. And if he develops, then at least going forward, you have a quarterback. And when we have this discussion, I think that needs to be pointed out that Zach Wilson's development is not the only thing that matters this season for the Jets. Having success matters on the field. It matters a lot. But so does Zach Wilson's development. So I think as far as this discussion goes, in this sense, a lot of it does come down to Zach Wilson. And you want Zach Wilson to play well. And even if the Jets miss the playoffs this year, and Zach Wilson really looks like he's the franchise quarterback of the future, you can probably live with that. How Zach Wilson looks so far this year? Well, it's been a bit up and down. I look at this. He's started 3 games so far. There was 1 game against Pittsburgh, which I think was really good. He led the Jets on that 10-point comeback in the fourth quarter, led them to a victory. A bit of an inconsistent game. He was not great through the full 4 quarters, but you can forgive a lot for a quarterback who delivers in the fourth quarter. And Zach Wilson delivered in the fourth quarter in that game. Probably the best quarter he played as a Jets quarterback. He looked decisive in the pocket. He making good reads, knew where to go with the football. That was a good game. Next week against Miami, it was an okay game. Zach looked decent. There were some reads he missed. There were some passes he hit. The Jets were not really a quarterback-dependent team in that game. I don't think Zach's performance played a huge role in the final outcome. He did what you needed him to do. That was decent. The game against Green Bay, now the film comes out on Tuesday, so I'll have a more in-depth analysis later in the week, but I don't think it was very good from the first watch. I think Zach really struggled. I mean, he had a few passes in the third quarter. That was about it, though. And the fourth quarter, he really did not need to work because the Jets were so far ahead, but for the most part, I thought the Green Bay game was shaky. So what do we need going forward? For me, like the Miami game is the game I look at because I don't think the Jets want this to be a quarterback-dependent team. In the last 2 weeks, it has not been at all. In fact, this week against Green Bay, I don't think the quarterback, unless the quarterback completely just was a catastrophe and threw like 4 interceptions, any quarterback's going to win that game. The Miami game is kind of the template I use because Jets were able to get the run game working in that game. For the most part, I think they played pretty good defense, and they got competent quarterback play. And from where Zach Wilson started last year, his rookie season was a struggle. Yeah, there was more bad than there was good in his rookie season. He's not going to be at the top of the league. And, I don't think the games like Pittsburgh are going to happen frequently. Now, you want to see games like that here or there where Zach Wilson does show an ability to lift the team on his back, to deliver in big moments, making good reads, looking like a quarterback looking like a winning quarterback. You want to see that occasionally, but from where Zach Wilson started, and frankly, for most second-year quarterbacks, that's not really a realistic hope. There's always an exception here or there, but most second-year quarterbacks are not going to be capable of lifting their team on their back consistently. They may be able to do it in a spot, once every month, once every 2 months, but it's not going to happen on that consistent of a basis. So what do I want? I want the quarterback we saw against Miami, a guy who, maybe showed his youth at times, showed his inexperience at times, but made enough plays. And if you put this quarterback into a situation where he's got a good supporting cast, where everything else is working around him, you're going to win games with him. He's good enough to win you games. Now, we want to see the rest of the Jets play like they did against Green Bay, because that was a dominant performance in every aspect except the passing game. And to be fair, listen, I'm not saying Zach Wilson was the only problem with the passing game against Green Bay. I don't think the Jets receivers played well. In fact, I think they mainly lost their matchups against a team that has a good group of corners. So Zach Wilson was not the only element that struggled in that game, but I think the game was a struggle for Zach. You want to see him avoid those. And the way I always look at this is you're always going to have one game a year as a quarterback where nothing works for you, where you just look terrible. So I don't want to go crazy over Zach's performance against the Green Bay Packers because I'm expecting that. Especially a second-year quarterback, there's going to be just one game where you look completely lost. Zach looked kind of panicked. It seemed like he was not getting the looks he wanted from the defense. We can move on from that. There's no point in obsessing over that performance. Jets won the game. It wasn't a great performance. We move forward. I'd be a little bit more worried if that was his first game back. But we've got a couple good games in the bank, so it's not as glaring of an issue. I just don't want to see that performance going forward, because if we start seeing that, every couple of weeks, then Zach's not going to be making the progress we want from him. And this game against Denver, against another pretty stout passing defense with good coverage, this is going to be a matchup where I want to see. I don't think Zach's going to be able to throw for 330 yards. And if he does, great. We'll all be happy if he does that. But I want to see him manage the game a little bit better, because I don't think he managed the game great against Green Bay. And again, I don't want to make it sound like this is the end of the world. I don't want to make it sound like this game against Green Bay was the game that we define Zach Wilson, because I honestly don't. I don't think it's a defining game for him. But moving forward, no matter how many games the Jets win or lose, much of success, not all of success, but much of success is going to be based on how Zach Wilson performs. So in that sense, I don't know if our expectations have changed all that much. But there's another sense where maybe our expectations have gotten a little bit higher. And we'll discuss that as we continue on this episode of Locked On Jets. Jets have a lot of young players looking like premium talent, and that can change everything. We'll dive into that more as we continue this Tuesday episode of Locked On Jets. The weather is turning cold in the Northeast. We are in the autumn. And for once, as the weather turns colder, the Jets are in the mix. They're 4-2 this season. They're right in the AFC playoff race. But As the weather turns colder, you may be looking to switch up your wardrobe, or maybe you won't. Maybe you still wear shorts in the winter. Maybe it doesn't matter if it's Florida or 10 degrees in New York, or maybe you live somewhere else. Maybe you live in New England, maybe you live in Chicago. Bird Dogs has the signature shorts with built-in liners. They're the most comfortable shorts in existence. Go to birddogs.com, that's BIRDDOGS.com, and enter promo code LOCKEDON. And if you do that, they'll throw in a free Bird Dogs rope hat. That's birddogs.com, BIRDDOGS.com, promo code LOCKEDON, and boom, a free Bird Dogs rope hat with your pair of Bird Dogs. The most comfortable shorts, pants, and sweatpants with built-in liners. You will not take these things off. Of course, the Jets are 4-2 this season. That's a sign the roster was upgraded over the course of the offseason. How did they do it? Lots of good draft picks. And a free agent class that got off to a rough start but is playing better. It's easy when you're in the NFL to find upgraded talent for your team. It's a little bit tougher if you're running a small business, though. Every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business, and you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. You post your listing, then you add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Yet there's simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. It's like having your own NFL draft or NFL free agency. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Again, that's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your jobs for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. This podcast is free and it's available on all platforms. That includes YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. That helps the channel out. It helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today we're talking about the 4-2 Jets. Feels great to say that, the 4-2 Jets. Jets off to a great start this season. Most of us had them pegged for, 6, 7, 8 wins. Should expectations be higher? The first segment I talked about how one of the goals this season is to see Zach Wilson develop. And that will, in some sense, be tied to the Jets' win total. In some sense, it won't. So maybe our expectations don't change so much from that standpoint, because that's still a goal. However, when we're looking at the win total of this team, you can't ignore the way these young players are developing. You got Sauce Gardner. And I dare say it, Sauce Gardner looks like an all-pro level corner already. He looks like one of the best corners in the NFL. I'm not going to say the best. He looks like one of the best corners in the NFL already. He's shutting guys down. Now, the only thing with that is, he's got to face a little bit more premium talent. He went up against Jamar Chase week 3. He went up against Amari Cooper week 2, and Cooper had a decent game. He's got to go up against some more premium talent before I'm ready to crown him the best corner in the NFL. But part of being great means that when you go up against guys you should shut down, you shut them down. That's what Sauce is doing. Quinnen Williams, my goodness. I had given up on the idea of Quinnen Williams being a superstar. Maybe I gave up on it a little early. 3 years into his career, I thought, okay, good player. Guy who, frankly, I thought got a little bit too much grief because I don't know that even at the 3rd overall pick, it's necessarily fair to hold it against a player that he's just good, that he's not a superstar. But Quinnen Williams has been unblockable lately. And you also have supporting talent. You have John Franklin Myers on the defensive line. Sheldon Rankins having a big bounce back. I'd given up on, speaking of guys I'd given up on, I wanted the Jets to cut Sheldon Rankins over the offseason. I was really excited last year when they signed him. He gave the Jets nothing last year he was a decent pass rusher, but he was giving the Jets nothing as a run defense. He's having a big bounce back year. He's playing really well. I think Carl Lawson's playing decent, maybe not worth the money the Jets are paying him, but playing pretty decent. On the other side of Sauce Gardner, you got DJ Reed, who's almost as good at corner. Quietly, Michael Carter II's developed into an excellent slot corner. I think the Jets essentially in their day 3 of the 2021 draft have 2 hits. That's pretty good. And they both have the same name, Michael Carter. So lots of performances on the defensive side of the ball. And then on offense, Breece Hall. He has become the guy on offense. This is now the Breece Hall offense. I think that after the last 2 weeks, very difficult to argue that. And you're seeing flashes from Garrett Wilson. He still had that game against Cleveland, even though he's been quiet. And really the rest of the passing game has been quiet the last couple of weeks as the Jets have moved. They've morphed their offense into a run-first offense. And you still have Michael Carter, who had a good game on Sunday. Behind Breece Hall is kind of an overqualified change of pace back. So you got young guys developing. And I think sometimes we overestimate how many pieces you need to be successful in this league. Because I go back to what I said. How many great teams are there in the AFC right now? Buffalo? Maybe Kansas City? There maybe you can name another team, but it's not like the AFC is overwhelming you with great teams. Cincinnati, who won the AFC last year, is kind of 500, and I know they beat the Jets, but there's not. This AFC is fairly open outside. Once you get past like the top 2-3 teams, and when we're talking about getting potentially a 7 seed, and this is the thing. Every offseason, I hear people list, well, the Jets have this need, this need, this need, this need, this need. They have 10 needs. They can't possibly fill them all. They're not going to make the playoffs. Well, the first part of that's true. You very seldom can fill all of your needs in the course of one offseason. But to be a great team, you don't need to fill all of it. You can have weaknesses and still, I shouldn't say to be a great team, but to be a playoff team, you don't need to be a great team. You can have weaknesses and still make the playoffs in this league. And really, more than anything, having strengths is more important than lacking weaknesses. Because if you have guys who can change the game, it makes everybody better. Look at the defensive side of the ball, Quinnen Williams, the attention he's going to draw. The fact he can get to the quarterback so frequently makes it easier for the guys to cover on the back end. And having guys who can cover on the back end, that makes it easier for the defensive linemen. Because the longer the Jets can cover on the back end, the more time the defensive linemen have to get to the quarterback. People always ask the question, would you rather have good defensive line play or good corner play? Well, the real answer is both, because they help each other out. And when you have both, it helps. Over the course of the offseason, I said this over and over. In today's NFL, if there are 2 spots I can be good, I want it to be defensive line and corner. And listen, I'd love to be better at linebacker. The Jets, I think when we get to the offseason, it's so great to not be talking offseason in October. It's so great to be talking about meaningful football. When we get to the offseason, we can talk about upgrading linebacker. We can talk about upgrading safety. Jets have been inconsistent at those spots, although I think both spots have played well the last couple of weeks. But when you have talent on the defensive line, when you have talent at corner, it makes everything easier. And on the offensive side of the ball, having somebody like Breece Hall, where it doesn't matter what, at least the last couple of weeks, we'll see what happens going forward, but the last couple of weeks, Breece Hall's looked every bit as good as advertised. And when you have somebody like that, it's going to make everything easier. Because how easy is it as a play caller when you can just give this guy the ball? You don't need to drop. Mike LaFleur drew up a few little gadget touches for Breece Hall, one of which ended up being a touchdown run when he had the cutback where he kind of went in motion and took the trap handoff on the running outside. But how easy is it as a play caller when you just say, give the ball to this guy and know that he's going to produce for you? And it's going to open up so much, because when you have a running back like this, defenses have to kind of simplify, because they kind of have to load the box. If they can't stop guys with their conventional looks, they have to load the box. And when you load the box, you can't really run complex coverages. I mean, you kind of have to man up, and not every team's going to have the coverage ability of Green Bay. And Denver's got some good coverage guys this week, so maybe it will not pay dividends this week. But in the future, if the Jets are forcing other teams to man up, they have solid receivers. Maybe they don't have great enough receivers to beat the elite man coverage teams in this league, but they have quality receivers. So there are going to be some opportunities here moving forward with Breece Hall. And all of this is to say, just a handful. Look how different this team is. And I understand that there are some other supporting players who have been added who are helping the Jets. And I think Laken Tomlinson, after a rough start, has kind of bounced back. In fact, I would say that I think the last couple of weeks, the addition of Dwayne Brown has probably done more to help Laken Tomlinson than anything else, because Laken Tomlinson had those great years with San Francisco, playing next to Trent Williams, who's top-notch, a Hall of Fame caliber tackle. I don't think Dwayne Brown's a Hall of Fame caliber tackle, but Dwayne Brown has really, really stabilized things. And I think he's made, in addition to just stabilizing left tackle, he's made Laken Tomlinson better. It's great to have Dwayne Brown back in the lineup. I know I guess it sounded like a joke. I said over and over, I had no idea when he had time to get injured. I was kind of joking, but I was kind of serious. But it's great to see him back in the lineup, because he has been as good as the Jets could have hoped for these first couple of weeks. But just these couple of players, they change everything. I mean, how many teams have 3 guys right now who are playing at an all-pro level? And I'm not one to make proclamations like that lightly, but I think the Jets have 3 guys playing at an all-pro level. How many teams have that kind of impact on their roster right now? Not many. And it gives you a shot to, make some noise. So from that standpoint, I think you could argue maybe expectations should be higher because a lot of this Jets season was based on potential. A lot of it was based on unknowns, how these young players would perform. And it seems like a lot of them are hitting their peak. And when that happens, you get better faster than anybody expects. So what does this all mean? We're going to come to our conclusion as we close out this Tuesday episode of Locked On Jets. Should our expectations be higher? Should they not be higher? I'll tell you what I think as we finish on this episode. This week, you were probably very happy if you were a Jets fan. You were probably doubly happy if you were taking the Jets in daily fantasy, if you had Breece Hall for more than 100 yards, if you had Quinnen Williams for more than 1.5 sacks. You probably did pretty well. And if you do play daily fantasy, let me tell you about PrizePicks. Here's how it works. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you against the projections available, and they offer projections on all sports. So it's not just football. If you're too nervous to play daily fantasy in the NFL, you can do it with the NBA as their season begins in the next couple of weeks. You can do it in the NHL. You can do college football. College basketball is not that far away. You can do soccer. And I say it every day. I can't believe it, but somehow you can play daily fantasy disc golf. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's just that easy, and they have fast and safe withdrawals, and they are currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to PrizePicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. And first-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, that means PrizePicks gives you $100 additionally. Don't forget to use promo code LOCKEDON. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDON, at sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100 using PrizePicks. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're talking about expectations for the Jets. Entering the season, most of us said success was not going to be based on whether the Jets made the playoffs. It was going to be based on progress. It was going to be based on things like whether young players were developing. Well, guess what? Young players are developing, and the Jets are 4-2, and the Jets are in the mix in the AFC. So should our expectations be higher? And I think that the answer is kind of nuanced. I think in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. Of course, there's the Zach Wilson element, and on some level, not completely, but on some level, that's kind of separate from the Jets' wins and losses. And on some level, this season's a success or a failure based on how Zach Wilson performs, but not entirely. Listen, if Zach Wilson doesn't exactly come along the way we hope he does, and the Jets find a way to make the playoffs, what, are you going to tell me that season's a failure? Of course it's not. Of course it's a success. And in some ways, I mean, frankly, for the Jets on this build, they need more than Zach Wilson. So success is beyond Zach Wilson. You want to see these young players who are playing well continue to develop. Here's what I'll say. Right now, my expectations are higher than they were at the beginning of the season. My expectations are higher than they were 2 weeks ago. My confidence level in this team's higher than it was 2 weeks ago. And it's not just because the Jets are winning, it's because of how it's happening. Because it feels like you're starting to see young players really step up. You're seeing young players develop in front of your eyes. And that's the sustainable path to success. This is not, I mean, yeah, it's partially the Jets kind of caught some breaks in their schedule. You know, maybe they played some quarterbacks who weren't so great. Even Aaron Rodgers was a little bit banged up, but they're going out and doing it. And I almost feel like the confidence level has grown since that game against Pittsburgh. You know, that team that the Jets beat, you know, if the Jets played Green Bay week 3, I'm not sure that game goes exactly the same way. It feels like this team is now starting to believe in itself. It's starting to feel like they can make some noise in this conference. So I think the Jets have a better shot now. And sometimes you just get on a little bit of a roll. And that's the biggest thing is you need to learn, you need to convince yourself you can do it. And it feels like the Jets have convinced themselves that they can do it. And, you know, if the Jets were playing the Cincinnati Bengals right now, they talk about week 3, I think that game would be different. I think this is a different Jets team than we saw just, 3-4 weeks ago because of the confidence they're playing with, because now they know they're not at the bottom of the league. They're not hearing about how they're at the bottom of the league anymore. They know they can beat opponents. They know they can beat quality opponents. I mean, that game against Green Bay, I don't know how good the Packers are this year, but that's not an easy game. It's not easy to go into Lambeau Field and do that to Green Bay. Not just beat the Packers, but really dominate them. So this thing just feels different to me. And I think that my expectation level is higher than it was entering the season. I think the Jets have a better shot at making the playoffs now. If you asked me at the beginning of the season, I would have said probably not. Now I think they have a legitimate shot. That said, I don't know how much you can change your expectations for the start of the season, because we all said at the beginning of the season, or at least most of us, I think, said this was not about, they could have a successful year without making the playoffs if young players came along. And you hope that they come along enough that they surprise you, and that's what's been happening so far. But let's say you see continued growth from Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams and Breece Hall. Jets are probably going to win enough games to make the playoffs, but even if they don't, if this continues and maybe they're losing because some of their veterans don't play well, maybe they suffer some untimely injuries, you can kind of live with that because you know that the future looks bright for this team. And more than anything, I think this fan base needs hope. This fan base has needed hope because it's been so bad. It's felt so hopeless. I think most fans in the NFL and most fans in sports are willing to live with losing if there's losing for a purpose. If you have a losing season, but you feel like young players are developing. And again, I go back to what I said in the first segment. It's true of Zach Wilson. It's true of the other young players. These things are not completely separate. Young players developing leads to wins. We've seen that with the Jets over the last couple of weeks. But, if the Jets somehow start losing games because, some of their veteran players don't hold up because guys get injured, but you're still getting the contribution from the young players and they do end up with 7-8 wins and end up, missing the playoffs by a game or two, I still feel like that's something you can live with. So I feel like it's kind of like a house money thing, the playoffs. I don't think it's something, even to this point, even though my confidence level in this team's growing, even though I think the odds of it happening are greater, I still don't think it's the type of thing that needs to happen. I think just keep doing what you're doing. If the young players keep developing, hopefully Zach Wilson, puts that Green Bay game behind him. We see more like Miami, maybe a few games like Pittsburgh here or there. It's going to be a successful season for the Jets, and the record will take care of itself. And maybe that means more wins, maybe it doesn't. So all this is to say, I think the answer is a bit nuanced, but I still lean toward the side of keeping my initial expectations because beyond the record, the Jets are meeting my initial expectations because their young players are developing and playing well. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. If you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening. You'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please a 5-star review. Helps the channel out. So does giving this episode a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Have a great Tuesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.